Hello and welcome to my session. My name is Dr. Cathery. I'm from the University of Texas at Austin, and I'll be talking with you today about Beyond Inclusion, Attending to Diversity by Design. Despite a growing number of equity initiatives, math education systems continue to struggle to support and attend to diversity as an asset. In the session, we will explore frameworks that attend to diversity by design and its application to math teaching and professional development. Following my presentation, I'll be responding to your questions in the chat space for the live Q&A. Now, let's get started. To begin, let's start from our own knowledge base and experiences. Define inclusion. How would you explain inclusion in mathematics to a parent, a community member, or a policymaker if they didn't know what inclusion was? And give you a few seconds just to reflect on yourself. Thank you for honoring that time for us to pause, think, and reflect. Current discourse of equity in teaching and learning are often framed around calls for inclusion, currently grounded in the extension of a set of static rights for high-quality learning opportunities for all students. Here, I want to highlight the limitations of current frameworks of inclusion. Inclusion right now often looks like a program, particularly in addressing educational inequities from COVID. That consists of Tier 3 interventions, of pullouts and supports, centering on skills and drills to catch up before Tier 1. Or the image here of the lone desk, a student with a disability, often a multilingual learner, in the classroom with their peers, but physically segregated, desk against a wall, sitting alone in the front, or always in a small group with a teacher, being asked to mimic the teacher's strategy. I ask us to consider inclusion to what? To critically analyze and disrupt dominant frameworks of inclusion that is often exclusive by design, this presentation will focus on three components. 1, critically examine current ideologies of inclusion. 2, shift practices using conceptual frameworks that support more dynamic and agentive opportunities for students and teachers. And 3, provide 3 examples across math education systems, classrooms, assessments, and school systems. To begin, inclusion labels, ability, and disability go hand in hand. And conversations of disability do not belong only in special education. As a category and a label, disability is diverse and fluid, with what constitutes a disability unstable and shifting through time, context, and people. Disability as a label has been used to justify slavery of those from African descent, to segregate Mexican Americans from educational opportunities, and to deny entry to the US for refugees, migrants, and non-European immigrants. Beginning in the 1950s, many states worked around Brown versus Board of Education to end racial segregation by creating tracking practices, special education classes as an extension to continue racial practices. And history is of the past and the present. The ways in which ableism and racism intersect can be seen in a disproportionate placement of students of color in lower track mathematics courses and within more subjective and high incidence categories of special education labels, such as intellectual disabilities, learning disabilities, and emotional behavioral disabilities, and the overrepresentation in disciplinary actions, all of which are linked to school pushout and incarceration. Even within the same disability, civil rights efforts through the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act has served as a tool of inclusion, often for white students, but a tool of exclusion for Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and other students of color who are excessively placed in segregated settings with less access to grade level curriculum and therefore limited access to the full range of math in science education courses possible. The image shown here is from my child's 6th grade science classroom on human evolution, which mirrors the sorting and weeding out process of US education systems. In this image, what does it mean to evolve? What social markers must one have as they evolve? I think of myself, my 6th grade kid. That kid's almost like that third one down, slightly with a mullet, slunched over. And for us to think, where does each of our students fit in? In US schools, concepts of normal, capable, smart create boundaries in which some students fit and others are marginalized. Inclusion is steeped in unexamined ideological assumptions. And these ideologies are systems of representations, images, myths, ideas that in profoundly unconscious ways mediate our understanding of the world and what it means to teach and learn mathematics. And why is this so significant? Why does this matter? The image of evolution also mirrors the leaky pipeline in STEM education. We have funneled out the talents of students and communities that cannot mask with the appearance, communication, and behaviors of the false narrative of what it means to evolve. So we move on to component 2. So in our next component, we focus on shifting practice. What are frameworks we can use to shift what is traditionally considered inclusion, and from fixing children to fixing the learning environment? An important framework is universal design for learning to strengthen Tier 1 intervention. I will not go into too much detail about UDL, but will call into attention common misconceptions and give some examples of it in application. So let's begin with understanding the foundational concepts of UDL. Universal design for learning. Here is a definition provided from the organization CAST. Take a moment to read through the framework description. What I want you to consider right now is what are some key phrases that you see here that may be different than traditional forms of inclusion in math education. And I'll read this out loud for us. UDL is a framework to guide the design of learning environments that are accessible and challenging for all. Ultimately, the goal of UDL is to support learners to become expert learners who are, each in their own way, purposeful and motivated, resourceful and knowledgeable, and strategic and goal-driven. UDL aims to change the design of the environment rather than change the learner. Our students are brilliant. When environments are intentionally designed to reduce barriers, all learners can engage in rigorous and meaningful learning. So thinking about what you've seen, what are some of the key differences between current dominant notions of inclusion? Some of these key words that many often notice: accessibility and challenging. UDL is grounded in the foundational concept that learning environments must be both accessible and challenging, in which students' access to mathematics is doing mathematics, an exposure to the beauty, wonder, and joy of mathematics problem solving and its application to the real world. Other critical components: expert learners. Students are actually experts of themselves. In math classrooms, too often, students' access needs are determined by the teacher. Instead, the goal here is to optimize student agency, autonomy, and choice to further develop their self-sufficiency. And last, change the design of the environment and reduce barriers. What are aspects of the curriculum that deny access to rigorous and meaningful learning for our students? The goal is to change the environment. Now let's understand the structure of the UDL guidelines. The UDL guidelines are organized both horizontally and vertically. Vertically, the guidelines are organized according to 3 principles of UDL: engagement, representation, and action expression. The principles are broken down into these guidelines, and each of these guidelines have corresponding checkpoints that provide more detailed suggestions. However, it's also organized horizontally. The guidelines are organized into 3 rows, and notice clearly there's a row on access, which provides guidelines that suggest ways to increase access to the learning goal by recruiting students' interest and by offering options for perception and physical action. But UDL is much more than access. It's also about building. The second row is called the build row, which includes the guidelines that suggest ways to develop and support students to deepen their effort and persistence, language and systems, and expression and communication. And finally, the last row, internalize. Here it provides guidelines that suggest ways to empower our students to self-regulate, comprehend, and their executive functions. Taken together, the guidelines lead to the ultimate goal of UDL. The goal is to develop students who are already expert learners of who they are to be experts of themselves. These UDL guidelines are not meant to be a prescription or for us to pull a few of the checkpoints, one from engagement, another from representation, and one from action expression to a lesson. These are a set of concrete suggestions that can be applied to instructional design, but the goal of it is to be intentional about the suggestions we pull with the focus on reducing barriers to maximize student participation. So a central focus here I want us to attend to, that is a common misconception of UDL. Our goal is to not randomly pull a few of these guidelines and suggestions and to implement them to our lesson. The main focus is to acknowledge the fact that our students are brilliant and to look at barriers that is denying student participation and for their capacity to shine through. In mathematics, barriers for students in mathematics classrooms often occur across 4 levels and occurs the most at the level of the goals. What are we teaching? What is the goal of the lesson? Recently, I've seen a focus on catching up, that learning goals are limited to the memorization of facts and skills without opportunity for student discovery, problem solving, and engagement and reasoning. Barriers then can also be our methods. How are we teaching the content? How are students given access to the process of learning, not just the product? The materials, what do students have to use to do mathematics in the classroom? And last, assessments. How is learning measured? Are we really measuring what they know and what they can do? So here is an image of a revised UDL process for designing for student agency. Notice how what is written here and what is highlighted in yellow is to identify barriers to learning and collective access. Our goal is to shift as much as possible from Tier 3 intervention to thinking about what we can do to ensure collective access for every one of our students. However, UDL as a framework, as we think about UDL as a framework in which to support our skills and pedagogies as teachers, we also have to be cautious. We spend extensive time in math education focused on methods and skills, which is that part of the iceberg seen. However, attending to skills alone is not enough to create sustained change. UDL has often been used as a catch-all. If I UDL my lesson, pick a few flexible ways for curriculum, I can ensure access for my students. However, what we see, the tip of the iceberg, is grounded in what is below, what is often unseen. So discussions of pedagogy alone is not enough. Systems. Notice how that's the part of the iceberg we see, but also don't see. It's that in between. What happens in classrooms are shaped by a broader system. Teachers, like our children, they don't need to be fixed. The system needs to be fixed. How can we create systems from grade level, school district, and statewide to ensure system-wide support and alignment that's centered on shared beliefs that all students are capable, and there is a need to disrupt practices and policies that have and continue to deny multiply marginalized students, students of color, multilingual learners, access for mathematics in which that is rigorous and attentive to who they are. Last, our individual and collective beliefs matter. What are our assumptions and beliefs about who can do mathematics, what mathematics can be, and where mathematics can take place? Do our beliefs about math teaching and learning ask for our students to be someone else? Do the mathematics we engage in, even with our young children, ask them to leave their identities and their rich ways of knowing and their elders and ancestors and their communities at the door? I know, and we all believe, that students are capable of learning at the highest level, and all students come into our classrooms as mathematicians, as their engagement in mathematics takes place daily in their communities and in their home. As such, our beliefs and actions have to mirror that. Component 3. So now that we've talked about universal design for learning, what does that mean as we think about examples of this framework, not just within a curricular standpoint of what happens within our textbook and curriculum, but within classrooms, assessments, professional development, and school systems? So I'm going to pull 3 examples that extend from 3 years of research practice partnerships, capturing best practices in elementary classrooms. Reimagining the Math Classroom is an NCTM publication that captures the work of 23 exemplar teachers in bilingual, suburban, urban, inclusive settings. To second, the image here, the Catalyzing Change series, which has greatly informed and helped me think about ways to meet critical changes in the current landscape of math education. And specifically here, the 3 examples pulled will come from such rich learning I've had co-teaching with teachers in inclusive and self-contained classrooms, learning from students at the intersections of race and disability. Example 1. One of the most powerful learning opportunities for me has been co-teaching in early childhood classrooms to tend to the mathematical brilliance of disabled students of color and our shared focus on eliciting and leveraging their multiple ways in which they make sense of mathematics phenomenon through multiple languages in which they speak, everyday talk, gestures, and drawings, often when, in truth, many of our students' communication preferences are not verbal. Above is a snippet of how we as a community of educators would watch each other's lessons, identifying student actions and how that demonstrated their mathematical understanding. Note, the focus of our time together was not on what our students could not do yet, but on what the students can already do, how they are problem solving, and the ways to leverage this. And let's try this as an example. What did it feel like for us to be spending our time just looking at kids? What might that look like for teachers to do this together? This is Melissa Brennan and Jason. Jason is in Melissa's special day classroom of students in grades TK, kindergarten, first grade. Jason is diagnosed with autism, and he loves math and building Legos. During the time of the video recording, Jason was in TK, and he's 4 years old. Okay, 4 years old, and I think about 8 months in. I'm going to play you a snippet of the video, which was recorded by Melissa as part of our work, was to observe students engaging in mathematics, not just in our classrooms during math instruction, but also what they're noting as math in their daily life. And as I'm playing the video, I want you to attend to the following things. What do you notice about Jason? What are some mathematical concepts and skills demonstrated here? Okay, get ready for the cuteness.
10 plus 3 equals 13.
Yay! Jason! Look at that. It's like a 10 frame.
Okay, looking at what was occurring there, Jason created his P's, because it was a rainy day, into a 10 frame. Amazing dexterity on that 4-year-old, making those P's into 5 and 5, and then making, I think it was 3 or 4 more. Thinking about the richness of our students and how they're able to see the world in ways in which math is all around them. And in the next image, you'll notice that what Jason did next was grab his neighbor's P's, because those P's were not enough, and then continue to build on, in which he then created 26 P's, again in the double 10 frame image. So in our small group with teachers, we would sit there and talk about what are we noticing around the skills that Jason already has, the concepts in which he's developing, and where we might go next. Notice how the language is around what he can do and the ways in which mathematics instruction can leverage that. So as I go back to the process for designing for agency image, I'm showing this process again because I want us to note how the process when we think about UDL or applications to design for diversity must begin with the first step of leveraging an identity, the rich cultural and mathematical wealth of our students. And this work of noticing what our students are able to do and the rich ways in which math is already a part of them and their lives must occur before identifying barriers to their learning. What barriers are preventing our students from shining their brilliance through? Melissa Brennan's special education classroom is the feature of the 8 mathematics teaching practices in the Catalyzing Change in Early Childhood and Elementary Mathematics documents. Often we discuss the type of instruction students with disabilities need as distinctly different than from their non-disabled peers. We were to say, myself being Chinese American, all Chinese students need to only learn in this way, we would call it racist. Yet we often state that students with disabilities, all 13 categories, need to be taught the same way and different from their non-disabled peers. That assumption, given the overrepresentation of students of color in self-contained special education classrooms, perpetuate both racism and ableism. I wanted us to pause and note here how Melissa is a featured example of equitable instruction. What is best practice for all? How often do we center on disabled students of color as representation of what is possible and what is equitable teaching in regards to problem solving and reasoning? Example 2, another critical learning in my work with in classrooms and schools is the importance of disrupting narrow views of engagement. I think it's important for us to name out the most common barriers that are the most pervasive in early childhood mathematics. These are the 4. A heavy focus when we think about inclusion on speed and memorization. 2, student access needs. What do our students need is often only determined by the teacher without ever asking our children themselves. 3, math development as linear and hierarchical. Our students cannot subtract before they add. They can't engage in fractions until a certain grade. These linear and hierarchical ways of thinking cause our students to always be functioning, working below grade level and denied access to grade level content standards. And the last one, avenues for engaging in mathematics and expressing learning limited to auditory and textual modes. Given these implications, a group of classroom teachers and researchers, we work together to collaboratively redesign classroom measures and assessments to capture the process of learning rather than just student outcomes over the course of the year. Understanding that math engagement is often only captured in verbal and written ways, we were intentional to examine student engagement beyond verbal. including how students use their bodies, visual tools, and manipulatives to communicate their mathematical ideas and problem solving. Here's two graphs that capture what we found throughout the course of the year. For example, just one teacher here. 52% of student engagement in whole group discussion were actually beyond verbal means. Students were explaining their thinking using manipulatives, gestures, and visual tools to communicate. In addition, students were more likely to build on another student's comments if they were building on a prior student whose engagement was also beyond verbal. In truth, that makes sense. It is much easier to build on someone's idea if you can actually see it. However, so much of the measures and assessments we use and the ways in which our young children engage in mathematics is only verbal and written. The third example is a recent aha. It's the silos. The silos that exist in which we track our students into separate spaces with little opportunity to learn from their non-disabled peers or peers who are at grade level. This assumption that students must be engaged in separated spaces are also perpetuated by how we track teachers, in which bilingual teachers and special educators are often siloed from their general education peers. Dr. Alham Kazemi asks, what does it look like for everyone in a school to learn together? Stephanie Williamson, principal at Whitaker Elementary, provides opportunities for adults and educators to learn collaboratively with the students in the classrooms. I know that sounds like just common practice in many schools, teachers coming together to learn from students. What Principal Williamson does differently is she brings her general education teachers into Suzanne Huerta, a special education teacher that teaches in a self-contained 4th and 5th grade classroom, to examine how she teaches grade level content and applying UDL principles to ensure access and rigor. Teachers are invited in to attend closely to student thinking, including those students whose communication preference is not verbal, intentionally to disrupt general education teachers' assumptions about labels, and to affirm the belief that all students, including students of color with disabilities, can do grade level math. The image you're seeing here, the one of just the 3/4, 6/4, and 9/4, this is the image from the textbook of what was written for the choral count. The choral count of the poster you see is the way in which Suzanne Huerta took up and made modifications using UDL to ensure that student had access and rigor to that choral counting opportunity. And then the last image is what she had done in tracking students' thinking for the final activity. I want us to note how she's supporting the use of language through multiple means of written, drawing, verbal work, representations. There's a use of concrete and semi-concrete representations to support students' learning of mathematical concepts and procedures. It's not treated as linear as one above the other, but that learning is really interwoven. I share these 3 examples humbly with you as things that I've been blessed to learn with teachers and students and community leaders. And now I bring it to you. Given what was shared, what guidance does UDL and providing spaces of collective learning does it offer for us in math education and for each of us in our roles as teachers, parents, researchers, and policymakers? I'm excited for our Q&A and to learn from you all. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the talk. This is just an open Q&A. Honored to be in this space with you all and to have dialogue based on what was shared. Just want to give a shout out to Louis. I love how you highlighted how Jason is using P's as his manipulative. So tools are all around us. Any questions or comments to allow us to deepen our conversation together? Thank you so much, Stephanie. in regards to your question, where can I find more information about UDL? There's tons of resources available, and there's a growing need for more resources, in particular relation to math. Some of the universal design for learning, and I'll put it in the chat. When we think of universal design for learning, its origins come from architecture, but the folks leading the work in education come from CAST. And I'm going to put that in the chat so you can see that. Let me switch over. I will say that for some reason, they're saying that the chat function is not allowing me to type in, but I can respond to Q&A questions. So that's interesting. So I can't type in for you all, unfortunately, but what I'll do is I'll spell it out. I apologize for this. That was not intentional because I cannot type in the chat right now. But if anybody else can, that would help. It's called CAST, CAST.org. So that's the name of the organization. It's a multifaceted organization that is leading the work around UDL and education. They have guidelines, principles, videos, tons of resources. Thank you so much, Louis. That's excellent. That's really, really helpful. Another great group that provides really concrete resources is San Francisco Unified. So if you just Google San Francisco Unified, UDL and math, what's so wonderful about what they've done is when we look at the UDL principles, they've also matched what each of these principles and guidelines would mean in math education in very concrete ways. I think it's lovely to note that San Francisco Unified has done this work as they were thinking about engaging in reform-based teaching that really centers on equity. So I think they're a really good resource. And I'm so sorry I cannot type in the chat. So if anybody can add that resource in, just Google San Francisco Unified and UDL math. And I'm going to also, I can't even do that, but I was going to say, oh, I'll give you my email address. So I think you should see my Twitter handle and hopefully my email address. Please feel free to email me and I'll send you all those resources. For some reason, unfortunately, I don't have access to typing the chat. Lisa, Ward, such a pleasure. I appreciate how I'm honored to have you in the room with us. And I absolutely agree that assets-based approach and CGI really go hand in hand. I think I'm seeing all the work that you all are doing around CGI work and how that is so central to that. Deanne, hello, so good to see you. What advice would you give to teachers just beginning to implement UDL in their classrooms? I would say all of us are doing UDL already in so many ways. Trina, thank you so much for including that web link. This is really the power of community and UDL in action. It's not what we do alone, but what we do as a group. So yes, that's exactly it. Thank you so much, Trina. So I would say, Deanne, going back to your question around how do we support teachers who are just beginning to implement UDL in their classrooms? I think one, it's important to realize that UDL is not a series of steps that we do. It's a belief system that helps us frame how we look at our classrooms. We're often so quick to think about what I do for this one kid or how do I engage in differentiation. And UDL is not against differentiation, but they're saying that instead of being so quick to push towards tier 3 intervention, we think about tier 1. What are the things that I can do to ensure and maximize my students' access needs, but also their agency? So instead of determining what my students need, I think about what I can do to center on their agency and what they need. Can they tell me what they need? Am I asking them, what are your needs? What are your access needs? What can I do to broaden that and to ensure that's available for all? And to look at those UDL principles and to start naming out, I bet many of you are doing them already. We just didn't even realize that they're UDL. Sarah, thank you so much for that comment. I stated that, and Sarah had said, I appreciate the reminder that we've never assumed all Chinese students should be taught in this way, and similarly should never assume all special education students should be taught in the same way. Often methods that help support our diverse thinkers and learners support all of our learners. Just want to Shaka your comment and revoice how important that is. Students with disabilities, we think about disability classifications, there's 13 of them. And even within disability classifications, students are not the same. As a mother with a child with multiple disabilities, I think of how often folks apologize to me for my child when I'm proud of my child and I'm grateful for my child. I've learned so much from her, and that we can't make assumptions about any of our students' social identities, but need to center on listening, engaging in the work of thinking deeply about how are we attending to their rich ways of knowing and how can we leverage that? Just like that P video that you watched. How can we really listen closely and watch closely what our children are able to do and to deepen that work? Revoicing Vincey's comment, really appreciate the thoughtfulness in how you are seeing UDL, specifically engagement, being applied to math learning for young learners. Thank you, Trina, for sharing the web link. I think it's Bindu. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly. Thanks for the great learning. What success have you had in bringing inclusion ideas in the classroom where curricular resources are followed? I'll be honest, in every school I've worked with, there are curricular resources. I think an important thing when I go back to what we wrote in Catalyzing Change, it's important for us to realize that in any curriculum, like we have textbook adoptions at districts, they are resources. There's no way, I look at curriculum of all sorts as like a buffet. You're given so many pages. We should not eat everything at the buffet or even what's first in the buffet. I like to go back to where the shrimps and oysters are at a buffet. Same thing as curricular resources we have at the district or school level. We should be judicious about how we're using them and center our students. No one is using all curriculum resources available at our districts. We are explicit about what we use and how we make changes to honor curricular integrity, not curricular fidelity. Our integrity as educators and with our students should be priority. I think given time, I'm gonna just read Sarah's. Focus on speed and memorization is a divisive topic right now, with some arguing that the research supports this is an effective evidence-based practice we need to do more of in the classroom. My wondering is how we might have opened conversations that would support disrupting this narrow view. Thanks in advance. I know this is a much greater question than the time available. I hope we can continue this conversation. I know they're going to, I think they're going to pause us soon. So I think my agreement is that we are seeing a growing focus on speed and memorization. And it is not to say that to have our students develop fluency is not important, but we have to remember that fluency is also flexible thinking. It's strategic thinking that builds on what students know. That includes prior mathematical knowledge and their lived experiences. If we acknowledge that all students are brilliant, they are all mathematical beings and do math every day. Are we attending to that and centering that and uplifting that in what we do? We have about 30 seconds, so just want to give gratitude to you all for joining today, and I look forward to connecting with you all and learning with and from you all as well. Thank you so much for your time.